Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first of Argus's monthly biomass podcasts. I'm Freddie Stermos. I work in the business development team at Argus. I'm the vice president for Generation Fuels. I'll be hosting you this week. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague Søren Alsing, who is the head of fuel at Ørsted, and Niels Severinsen, who's a biomass procurement officer at Hofer, and also my colleague April Poor, who's the editor of the Argus Biomass report. The format for today is we'll have a market roundup, just looking at new developments in the market. That'll be led by April, and we'll move straight into a discussion with the panelists, Søren and Niels, off the back of that. And this week the topic is how biomass purchasers are responding to the fallout from the coronavirus crisis. So we've got some really interesting content and some really interesting views as well from the panelists. So I look forward to that. First up, we'll move straight into the roundup from April. So April, if I could hand over to you.
Really just to get on to recapping what's been going on in the European pellet market over the last few months. The market finds itself in another interesting and, shall we say, challenging, I think, for everyone, position. If we look straight at spot prices on the CIF Northwest European index, prices have been in decline, quite a steep decline since the winter. There's a few reasons for this. I believe that the primary driver, will be interesting to hear what the panelists' view is on this later. The primary driver, I think, really is the mild winter that we had in Europe. The market was always probably going to be in this position regardless of the COVID-19 outbreak, in that we were probably going to have a steady decline on the spot market in prices, merely because there was so much wood pellet supply left over in Europe after the mild winter that we had. And then the impact of what's happened with coronavirus certainly hasn't helped the situation. My personal view is that it's not the main driver of the position that we are in today, i.e. very weak spot prices and weak production margins. Coronavirus, of course, has significantly weakened power demand across Europe, and where there is less power demand, in many cases there is less need for wood pellets in industrial power. So it sort of made the situation with oversupply a bit worse, we could say, but isn't the main driver. And then, unfortunately, we've had a fire at RW's Eemshaven plant in the Netherlands, and that has really, again, kind of contributed to the oversupply that we've seen on the market. And just to sort of briefly cast our minds back to 2016, 2017, when the market was also in a difficult state, and actually spot prices reached their record lows. The sort of price levels that we've seen this month, this June, are more or less mirrored on the CIF market as to they mirror the levels in 2016, and indeed actually the decline from winter to now versus the decline from the winter at the beginning of 2016 to the summer of 2016 is actually a lot steeper. And so I think that it's not too controversial to suggest that we could find ourselves once again looking at a backwardated market towards Q4. It might not be the case, of course. We could find ourselves having a sort of a colder winter. Things can always change, but things look remarkably similar on the CIF pricing structure as they did those few years ago. So that's something interesting to perhaps discuss with our panel a little bit later. And moving on the supply side, of course, prices are falling, demand has been pretty weak, and unfortunately for producers, we've also seen rising raw material costs. Again, I think this was probably going to be the case anyway, but the coronavirus outbreak has sort of irritated this part of the market a bit more. We've seen sawmill closures. There's been a decline in global demand for wood products, and that means, of course, less residues and less feedstock potentially for a lot of producers across production regions in Europe and also North America. And so producers are in a difficult position, could say, for the next 6 months in sort of uncertain demand going into winter and rising costs. I think they're the sort of main topics really that shape what's going on in the market at the moment, and it would be certainly interesting to hear from some of the panelists as to whether they agree with what I've highlighted there as the main drivers and challenges for the rest of this year.
Thank you very much, April. So, really nice roundup and great to have your views on what's happening now in the market, but also a bit of an outlook from now to the end of the year, and summarising some of the key things that have happened in the market that are possibly cyclical, but some which are a bit more problematic. So there's a few kind of areas that I'd like to discuss with the panelists, and I don't want to sort of stick to a particularly rigid format, but perhaps we could start off just developing some thoughts about what April was talking about. It seems to me, from a pricing perspective, that there's a huge swathe of the market in terms of the supply side, which is currently unable to operate at a margin at all. In fact, it's probably operating at a significant loss. Not just because of the outright prices, but because of what April alluded to there in terms of the high raw material costs, just the weaker overall supply picture for raw materials. Where do you see currently, and where do you foresee in the future that any sort of response on the supply side coming from? Perhaps I could direct that at Soren to start with, and then move on to Niels as well.
Thank you. First of all, I would allow myself to comment, just make one comment to April's roundup, because it was you refer to you're referring to the 2016 price level. I think that's right from a price level point of view, but I think it's we have to be careful not to just compare one to one, because at that time the market was fairly different from now. It was much smaller. It was fewer players. I think in terms of interpretate what happened at that point in time and see if we can forecast something from now, it's maybe not the right thing to do, because there will be different response in the market now. We believe, at least, because the market is simply bigger, more players and more producers, more consumers, etc. So from that point of view, I think we cannot draw a line one to one. That was my comment. With regards to the response on the supply chain, I would also, in terms of what have happened in the recent season and what kind of impact we have seen from COVID, I would like to divide it into first the supply chain and then after the more the demand side, because of course the supply chain, basically we haven't seen any impact so far. Everything have worked perfect. All the producers has performing perfectly. We have, I think it's fair to say, we have all high stocks, both the producer side and the utility side, and the traders in between even. I think even though we were maybe expecting some interruptions I mean, everything was very uncertain in the beginning. How could the vessels arrive in the ports? Would there be any interruptions there, etc.? But everything worked fine, except for the crew was maybe more restricted in their let's say in their movement, or in whether they were allowed to go on shore. So far we haven't seen really any impact, but we do agree. I do agree with the assessment or analysis from April regarding what could happen. I mean, there could be some let's say, more restricted supply chain, maybe more on the raw material or the feedstock. We haven't heard, and we have heard, and we have seen already some impact on sawmills, and of course the feedstock are to some extent or large extent depending on residues from sawmills. How will the demand materialize going forward after COVID? That's of course an uncertainty whether the impact on COVID will be maybe on a midterm. On the demand side, we have seen a decrease in the demand on power. The power prices was already low. It was very high level in the Nordic reservoirs. So hydro have been extremely, let's say, low prices that have really pressed the power prices down, and then also have an impact on our consumption, at least, even though we are very much demanded, or we're very much heat demand driven. But the power prices has also a very significant impact on our consumption. And then the mild winter, which was already mentioned, also gave a little bit of setback in compared to prognosis on the heat demand.
Okay, and perhaps Niels, if I could turn to you for your views on the points that April raised in the presentation as well, and whether or not you've started to see anything operationally different from the procurement perspective as a result of recent events.
Sure. I will say I will in general agree very much with Søren, and also with the pointers that April gave us. But I also think that the mild winter, compared with what we saw last year in the market, have had the effect that the foresters and the operations in the forest really they have really tried to maximize out to get a high production, and thereby also the high storages we see right now. And that's simply due to the fact that they have had the access to the forests this year. Regarding the forest operations, as we see it, or I see it from the Hofor side, we are unaffected, or they are unaffected until now. But however, we also see that is a trend that the demand of forest products will decline due to the coronavirus we have had now. We see also that the sawmilling business is still running a good pace. But I guess there will be a delay due to this business we see from the private households. What we're going to look into for the time being now, I guess that there will be a lack of construction projects, and that will affect the sawmilling business in the upcoming year, and that will also thereby push the sawmilling residuals down.
So, do you think?
Can I add another? I mean, also kind of maybe more an implicit impact from the COVID crisis, the pandemic. I think also the COVID had let's say enhanced the length of the market due to the postponement of the commissioning of MGT, which is a decent big consumer going forward. I think and knowing that at least a couple of suppliers was very well prepared for start supplying this plant, and now have to dump it into the market, have of course also the obvious effect of prices and length.
Okay, so there's definitely a kind of tangible effect on, like you say, prices and length in the market from what's been happening at MGT. I mean, just to sort of dwell a bit on the points that have been raised about raw material costs, because I think that's very interesting. And do you think it'd be fair to say that given the price is where it is, the regions that are being most impacted by rising raw material costs, they'll be the regions that have to kind of respond quicker in terms of supplies coming into the market? Just because it strikes me that there has to be some sort of supply side response over the next 6 months in order for things to rebalance somewhat. When you've got so much of the the suppliers, so many suppliers that will be losing money selling spot tonnage at these prices. I'm just trying to figure out where any sort of supply side response to the current disequilibrium, where it might come from.
Well, I think it's deviate a little bit from region to region, or let's say origin to origin. I think maybe some areas are more exposed than others. But indeed, I also, as Argus already have reported a couple of times, we don't have a healthy price level at the moment. Even though we would like low prices as a consumer, but we also would like a healthy market where we have a decent liquidity and decent, let's say, competitions and supply and demand balance. So it's not healthy at the moment. Maybe one comparison to to 2016 could be that there could be a too significant or too much fallout, not even temporary, but for good, of pelletizing production capacity. So that's really a risk. Said that, it's also very much looking after what's happening in the feedstock to the pelletizing plant, because it's also varies from region and countries. Looking at the Baltic, you see that there are sometimes a huge impact on the demand on pulpwood, and how the reaction and response are from the big producers in Finland and Sweden. They used to consider the Baltic, at least the Estonian and maybe also Latvia, as a kind of swing suppliers, and we have seen these impact previous. And you also hear that there are already some recovering of the demand of let's say higher value products, wood products. So also the sawmills are gradually recovering again in that region. Maybe it's different in US, where we hear some stories about even sawmills have been shut down for good. So I think it's not a homogeneous picture.
Okay, and Niels, does that kind of chime with your view on the market as well, in terms of the different regions and how they're being impacted differently?
Yeah, I will say also, but thereby say our main focus is on the Baltics, but we also see the picture that Søren is painting just before. Okay,
and presumably not just because of the way that the price has moved, but the way that the kind of market dynamics are shifting. Is this forcing, both of you as people that are kind of responsible for buying, fuel in the market? Is it forcing you to do things differently to how you did it before? I mean, is it actually throwing up opportunities or potential dangers or pitfalls in the market? Perhaps, Niels, if I could start with you on that one.
Yeah, you can say that the prices that we're seeing right now, they are making us trying to hold our horses in our procurement. As you may know, our use or our consumption of wood pellets have been dropping down to only 150,000 tons a year. So we are not that big in the market anymore. But another also said that we know when we need the pellets potentially, and we also know that those months we are looking into, they will cost some extra compared to now, because we are seeing prices right now that are also lower than what we see in Argus. And we are also seeing that we are going down to a level where we are talking about that where the marginal cost for what the production cost, it's about to cross the line there. So we're seeing that we are going back, but we're also seeing there will be a lot of pellets in the market, and I will personally say at least until New Year, we will see we'll still see storages around many places.
Okay, and Søren, over to you. Do you is it kind of forcing any kind of change in activity on your side in terms of buying fuel on the market?
Well, we are not very active at the moment buying, but if at all. But I don't think that the strategy or the way we used to design our portfolio will change. Looking back, I think we have had like 2 extreme years in a row, but in different directions. So there's no normal year. What is a normal year? So the best thing is to be prepared for any kind of extremes. Saying that, we have already in our portfolio a very big variation from the highest to the lowest in terms of consumption, and that's a significant spread we have to cope with, and we cannot solve that just purely by having enormous, let's say, storage capacity. It's so we are depending on what's happening in the market and to balancing our portfolio. So, and that the way we have done it, we will carry on. I mean, this year all came out of the season long, and so I think the biggest threat for the supply at the moment is the lack of demand, and it's only a matter of how many producers regrettable will not make it. This is not healthy for the market. We always supporting fresh supply. So that's the threat to the market, that somebody simply can keep the head above the water, so to speak.
And just looking at it from an absolute pricing basis, obviously, we're at historic lows in terms of the price of wood pellet, and in terms of the price of various other fuels as well. I mean, is there anything as a utility that you're looking at doing to possibly manage price risk going forward, to actually kind of capture that value destruction that is theoretically quite beneficial to you as long as you can source the fuel? Low prices are good for end users, right?
Well, it's I would say yes, but also it's also very much about the spread, what you have in power prices and heat prices, and of course you can transfer some of it, but it's also a relative business. I mean, in terms of prices, and we also previously have let's say also publicly supported any new initiative in terms of derivatives or hedging tools for the price pellet or for the pellet prices, but to be seen still whether it will be sufficiently, let's say, liquid, but definitely something we will look into and follow and also support, because in previous times when the fuel was black, we were I mean, we used a lot of these hedging tools, of course, and derivative market, paper market in general. So yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I've realised we spent a lot of time talking about wood pellets. Niels, from a wood chip perspective, are we looking at a very, very similar picture? Are there subtle differences or very, very clear differences in terms of the way that the markets are behaving at the moment?
If we are looking at the European market, we are seeing big disruptions. But all the bark beetle attacks in Central Europe, we are seeing huge volumes, and they are really starting to get pushed out to the coastline of Europe, especially from Germany. And that means that we are seeing prices dropping a lot, and we also see it's not only on the spot, but it will go on for I guess minimum 3 years ahead, and thereafter these stores will start to get empty. But that means that we are seeing that the prices are quite low for the time being, and they will remain low, also due to the fact that the forest operations will go on for in the autumn, and the storages will be filled up, and also thereby said with round wood, round timber to be chipped to biomass, and we can see that have an effect in the whole of the northern part of Europe. So I guess that is the main disruption we're seeing in the market right now.
Okay, Oh, that's interesting. Obviously, there's disruption across across both wood pellets and wood chips. So it's quite interesting to hear about the details on precisely what's happening in terms of wood chips. And you mentioned that you're looking at a 3-year time frame for things returning to some kind of normality. Is that changing anything in terms of your approach, in terms of how you've done it in the past versus how you'll do it over the next 3 years?
We from my organization, we have a clear strategy, and that is to spread out our procurement on many different countries and on many different suppliers. So I will say we stick to that strategy. But on the other hand, we also see that we have an international problem, and because the bark beetles do not know what a border is between countries, and we need to take hand around these problems in Central Europe. And these the death of the forest done by the bark beetles, we have to regenerate the forest, and we can only regenerate the forest down there by taking out the old material and get it out of there. And the fact is simply that the longer we see that the trees stand dead in the forest, the drier they will be, and that also means that they cannot be used for pulp, for example. They cannot go to the wood mills to be made into construction wood and so on, and that will mean that we will see great or huge volumes for biomass, and that tends to push the price down in many places. And there's also a general tendency that we see that the people are getting or the suppliers are getting better and better in optimizing their production in many parts in Europe, and that also means that they can actually follow the price a little bit. I'm not saying that they could be the same. They are thereby helped by a strategy where we spread out, but we are seeing that the market can actually hold quite low prices for the time being.
Okay, that's really interesting. There's a degree of responsiveness on the supply side for wood chip from wood chip producers, I should say, particularly when it comes to following the price, as you say, Niels. I feel like that's probably lacking slightly on the wood pellet side. I mean, would you agree, Søren?
Yes, but can I also comment on the wood chips?
Of course, yeah. Please.
Because I think, of course, is the wood chips, the logic and the sentiment in the wood chip market is maybe slightly different from the wood pellets, because it's maybe easier to set up a flow. You need, let's say, one guy, 2 trucks and a chipper, then you're up and running. Then of course they're always very surprised about all the admin regarding making it completely sustainable and certified. But apart from that, we see the same picture as described by Niels. However, I think it's very, very important to emphasize that and that you also indicated that, Niels. But whatever we take of wood chips is wood chips which cannot be used for any higher, let's say, value purposes. It's a very important statement to also to put here that it's not that because there are all these attacks from the bark beetle in some area, then it's just about a surplus of supply, and then it's a big party. We can just take whatever we like. It's not at all. Every single, I would say, almost log will be assessed for whether it can be used for a higher purpose. So it's only the bottom of the value chain we can pick out from these areas. Going forward, I think also due to this surplus of supply, however, it will develop some supply chain also to the north, the coastline, and up to Jutland even, and that will also maintain after this let's say peak of supply will have let's say passed, which is good. We are very much focused also from Ørsted to see to the extent possible to take Danish wood chips, of course. We have one plant located inland, so to speak, and it's purely Danish wood chips, but also we see to which extent we can bring in Danish wood chips to the other plants which is important from us, not only from a Danish point of view, but also to because we see the price kind of competitive to imported wood chips as well.
Well, it's really interesting to hear that the market is actually developing as a result of some of the things that have been happening recently, and like you say, like you explained, the infrastructure is being developed. More sources are being developed on the wood chip side. When do you think? And this is a $1 million question, really, but and perhaps there is no normal. But when do you think we'll get back to some sort of normality in the market across wood pellets and chips? So
maybe I could counter ask, what is the normality? I mean, it's the normality, but it's the normality according to the textbook is a kind of a balanced market, supply demand. But maybe the nature of these markets are simply so sensitive to whatever happened impacting. So they are very, let's say, volatile. We don't know yet, actually, because we haven't seen this size of this industrial market on pellet and similar to wood chips. We haven't seen these markets really for more than a couple of years now. So there is no really track record.
Yeah, I
maybe it was
agree,
a little bit provocative answer, but I think it's fair to say what is normal.
If I could just sort of chip in there as well, I really agree with Søren's sentiment. Often at conferences or when we do our sort of yearly or quarterly roundup of the wood pellet market, particularly when we look at the winter, and we're often asked things like, is this the new normal on the biomass market, or sort of when, how typical things are. And I think Søren is pretty spot on when he says there is no original normal for there to be a new normal. There is no typical year. We have in our mind the idea of what a sort of quote unquote normal and balanced year would look like, i.e. peaks in the winter and things softening in the summer at sort of sensible, steady levels. But that's never actually in reality for long periods of time been the case. So it is very difficult. It's more of a theory of what is normal rather than anything that's actually really happened for long periods of time on the wood pellet market. So maybe it's provocative, but I definitely agree with Søren's sentiment there.
And if I may chip in, I do as well, and especially when you're calling the pre-COVID state right now, because I guess we made this agreement to do this podcast like a month ago or something like that. What we're seeing right now is that this COVID situation is probably going to continue in some parts of the world, or some countries. Also within Europe, you see very different restrictions in the different countries. So I also think it's very hard to evaluate on for the time being right now. Thank you.
Great. I think, well, like, as you sort of described, we do seem to go from feast to famine to feast again in this market, both in terms of the availability of supply and the amount of demand that there is, and that's always reflected in the in the pricing. I think that probably brings us quite nicely to the end of the podcast. So I'd like to just say thank you, gentlemen, for joining, and thank you, April, for your roundup and for your contributions on the discussion as well. It's been very useful. I'm sure our listeners and our audience will find it useful as well. And we'll be back next month in August for another one of these podcasts looking at a different subject. But thank you all again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.